Hello and good evening. My name is Vic Pardoe and welcome to this CPAT winter lecture. This evening I would like to share with you some of my attempts at recreating Bronze Age metalworking techniques. I live in the uplands of mid Wales, surrounded by many early Bronze Age monuments, and this, combined with my interest in experimental archaeology, inspired me to try and recreate the skills and material culture of our prehistoric ancestors. I started by teaching myself flint knapping, which was a challenge in a land without any flint. But once I'd learnt the basics, I could make tools which could work bone, carve wood and stone, scrape skins and make arrows and bows to shoot them. So I guess it was only a matter of time before I started melting rocks to make metal. So several years, much research and many failed attempts later, here we are. Pre-COVID, I was sharing my skills by delivering hands-on demonstrations, skills workshops and guided walks. So I guess this presentation is the 2021 version of all that. We'll start with a short film of me recreating a copper axe using mostly the same methods as our ancestors would have used 4,500 years ago. A period which in Wales is referred to as the Late Neolithic, Early Bronze Age, 2,500 to 2000 BC. A time when people were starting to move into the uplands, clearing the woods and building many of the cairns and monuments that still survive today. A time when metalwork was still a rare and exotic commodity. Then we have a PowerPoint presentation where I'll go into more detail about the Forgotten Finds project, and this will be followed by a Q&A. So I hope you all enjoy. It creates like a pool, and that acts as kind of catalyst. So the copper, because it's sitting in molten metal, it's more likely to melt. If it's just a dry heat, it just sits there and glows until it's not getting melted. So. That's really quite close. So I'm going to carry on at that. It's looking a bit fudgy in there, but this about 6 or 7 times, and even though it's only sandstone, it was the 7th time I poured it. It actually broke. So it's they are quite durable. Quite durable. Right, let's have a look and see what we've got in here. Try and avoid getting any charcoal in it, but usually can't help it. Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
That's good. That's good. It's going to take a lot of work, to be fair, but
Can you just say something about the 2 different kinds of stone that you're using here for the grinding process?
Yeah. This is a granite anvil. And this is a quartzite hammerstone. All of these came off the local beaches, and probably what they would have used. Because this copper is quite malleable, even though this is only roughly axe shaped, there's every reason why we can at the very least draw out an edge to this. And once we've got the edge and we've got the rough shape, this is a an old red sandstone slab, and it's got bits of pyrite in it, so it's quite a good grit, and basically it does move material.
Oh yes, definitely. Real polish on it here already.
Yeah. This is cast from the same mould. This obviously won't end up the same shape as that, but so this is the copper axe head we cast the other day, and after much hammering, grinding and polishing, it's looking quite good. And one of the questions I get asked about these copper axes is, how can they be any good? How can they be effective as copper is so soft? But using the process of hammer hardening, which we'll go into later, you can get these quite hard. Now, to try it out, what I've done is I've hafted it into this piece of willow stick. Other British hardwoods are available, but the reason I've selected this piece is because there was a branch coming out at this angle, and so what we have is a big knot here. And so when I'm striking, that knot will prevent the whole thing just splitting and the axe flying off and losing it, basically. Now I've already been trying it out on a few pieces, making a bit of firewood. So just to demonstrate how effective this thing is, I shall try it out. There you go. If you have a look at the cut marks, you can see they're quite clean. And as you can see, there's no damage on the edge of there. It's all looking pretty good. This next part of the presentation focuses on my attempts to recreate some of the Bronze Age metalwork finds from Wales and Powys in particular. An opportunity for me to develop some of the techniques used by these highly skilled metalsmiths, and hopefully gain some insight into the lives of our Bronze Age ancestors. The results of this have evolved into a project which, for want of a better name, I've called Forgotten Finds. It all started when I joined the Radnorshire Society and spent many a Tuesday morning at their library in Vrede, going through their archives. And hidden in old transactions and archaeological journals were articles about Bronze Age metal finds, mostly ploughed up from fields or found hidden under rocks. And usually there was an illustration, some basic measurements, and hopefully a nice story. It was only when I tried to track down some of these objects that I realised that they were mostly in unknown private collections or gathering dust in a museum drawer. To be fair, these are not glamorous objects like the shiny gold torch from the Nuffle or Hayhope, but I think they still have stories to tell. So who cares anyway? Does it matter if most of these objects are inaccessible to the general public? Well, as I've discovered during the past 3 years of this project, people are very interested in their local history, or in this case their local prehistory. It gives them a connection to where they live and a sense of continuity. So the idea then was to recreate some of these forgotten axes, daggers and dirks, and create a handling collection which, along with their associated stories, could be used to give a little glimpse into the lives of our ancestors from the darkest depths of the Bronze Age. My original idea was to create an exhibit that would tour around local museums, but thanks to COVID this hasn't been possible. So this presentation is a digital version. This first piece I've chosen is actually on display in the Radnorshire Museum. I've included it because it helps to tell our story. And this is a piece of a bronze flat axe that was found somewhere in Radnorshire and dates to the early Bronze Age. So it's probably between 2000 to 1800 BC. For context, that's 2000 years before the Romans invaded Wales. It's quite small, it's only 45mm wide at the blade, and my first question when I saw it was, why is it broken? Maybe it was broken in use, or was it broken deliberately and placed in the ground as an offering? Maybe it was a failed casting. Either way, it could have just been melted down and recycled. But personally, I think the offering interpretation is most likely. I decided to try and recreate a complete copy of this axe using an early Bronze Age technique, the two-part or bivalve stone mould. I took two similar sized pieces of old red sandstone, squared them up by pecking and grinding the edges, and then grinding the two inner faces together to get them flat. This is to create a good fit to stop the molten bronze pouring out the sides. The grooves you can see are locating pegs, so the two halves line up. For this I experimented with a copper chisel, but it wasn't as effective as the flint boring seen above it. The next stage was to carve the axe shape into the mould, which I'm doing here using a flint pecking tool. Now, this is a very short clip, but hopefully you can see the marks that it makes. The definition on the edges and the cleaning of the peck surfaces was achieved using flint scrapers. Once our mould was ready, it was aligned, joined and ready for pouring. And here you can see the furnace with the mould at the top of the screen. The molten bronze is then poured into a cup on top of the mould. And here you can see the sprue as it's poured, glowing orange. And this is what we ended up with. You can see the flash around the edges and the sprue at the end. And you can also just make out where bits of stone mould have stuck to the casting. This type of mould could be used to make multiple axe heads, but would degrade with each new cast, each having less definition than the last. With this particular mould, I would guess at least half a dozen castings before the result stopped being a usable axe head. This next reproduction was based on a find from Carno in Montgomery in 1830. There's no record of the context of this find. It's probably of a similar early Bronze Age date to the last piece, and this has a blade of over 100mm and would make a very usable felling axe. A study suggests that 50% of all early Bronze Age axes had some form of decoration. So these next few slides will show my efforts to recreate some of the processes used to harden, grind and decorate these bronze axes. This slide shows a simple clamp made using the tools in the image. The carpentry techniques used were well known by this period, and the flange dax was used to split and trim the base, and the bronze chisels cut the mortises and trim the pegs. The result being a simple but effective clamp. So once the axe head is cast, the flash and the sprue have been removed, the next stage is to hammer harden the blade. This process is applied to all bronze edge tools. The purpose is to compact the bronze molecules, and this makes the alloy harder. Here I'm using a quartzite hammerstone and a granite anvil. You can see the hammer marks as I move along. You can repeat this process a couple of times, but the addition of tin to bronze makes the alloy harder, but also more brittle. So overworking it without annealing it will cause it to crack. It also makes a lovely noise. Next we grind out the hammer marks using a sandstone slab with a bit of water for lubrication. This is quite a slow process, but you can start to see the results quite quickly. This next clip shows how I do the punch decoration. So in this case I'm using a middle Bronze Age punch based on a find from just over the border at Ebnal in Shropshire, and a later Bronze Age socketed hammer, but this works just as well with a hammerstone. The punch has a slightly higher tin content, which makes it harder than the axe I'm working. And this is the finished decorated axe head. And you can see the punch in the bottom corner there. This next pair of axes were cast as part of an exhibit that is currently in the Radnorshire Museum in Landrindod. The exhibit is called The Forgotten Axes of Radnorshire. The idea was to engage local communities and tell the stories of these forgotten objects. On the left is a type known as a Haft Flange Dax. This was a development of the flat axe. The advantage of the side flanges and the stop ridge was that it was more secure when hafted and less likely to work itself loose when in use. This then eventually developed into the true Powell stave, which takes that idea even further, especially with the addition of the side loop. This meant that you could secure the axe to the haft to prevent it from flying off and getting lost in the undergrowth, which does happen. This slide demonstrates how these axes were hafted. Using a naturally bent branch or a main stem with the branch coming off at a right angle. You can see the lower axis secured with a leather strap. This is an early Powell stave design that made use of cast lugs instead of a loop. So this is the Forgotten Axes exhibit in its display case in the Radnorshire Museum in Landrindod. The original plan for this was to take this display to Carrad in Rada for spring 2020, but thanks to COVID this has been postponed, but at least I can tell their stories here. Chronologically, we start with a Haft Flange Dax head, dating from the early part of the Middle Bronze Age, so possibly around 1500 BC. My reproduction is seen here sitting on a copy of a 1972 Radnorshire Transactions, which featured it in an article. The axe head was found under a relatively modern stone wall that was being repaired near Penrue Frank Cottage, above Landrindod. As you can see in this illustration, the blade and the butt end have been burred over. This damage was possibly caused by whoever originally built the wall using this bronze axe head as a chisel for dressing stone and hitting the butt end with a steel hammer. They may have then put down the wedge and accidentally built the wall on top of it, only to reappear again 50 years ago. Where it came from originally we'll never know, but there are Bronze Age sites close by and maybe it came from one of them. These old Radnorshire Society transactions are available online if you'd like to read the full account of this tale. So how would Bronze Age metalsmiths have cast these axes? Bivalve stone moulds, like we saw earlier, are a possibility. But another possible technique was a ceramic bivalve mould. This one is made up of clay, grog and horse muck. Grog is fire clay that has then been ground up. This strengthens the mix and reduces shrinkage as it dries. And the fibres from the horse muck make the mould more porous, which helps prevent it exploding when you fire it. These mould parts were fired at around 600 degrees C, but ideally we'd need around 1000 degrees C to turn the clay into ceramic. So to make your axe mould, you impress a former into the two clay halves, and when dried and fired they make up the bivalve mould. So let's compare these ceramic moulds to stone moulds. So it's possible to make these up fairly quickly, and if you made them in multiples then it wouldn't matter if you only got one cast per mould. It takes time to dry and fire them, but it would mean you didn't need to source suitable stone. This slide shows a Haft Flange Dax I cast using this method, fresh from the mould and still with its casting flash. The other story in the Forgotten Axes exhibit regards a hoard of 5 Lake Powell staves found near Red. Powell staves are a style of axe used throughout the Middle Bronze Age, which in Wales is roughly 1450 BC to 900 BC. This particular style is thought to be quite late in the sequence and may have still been in use during the Late Bronze Age. So these 5 axe heads were found by a metal detectorist who at the time claimed they came from individual find spots. But the fact they were all so similar suggests that they were part of a hoard. There was also a sprue found with them, which is the waste from casting process, so there is a small chance that these could have been cast nearby. They were bought by the National Museum of Wales, but to the best of my knowledge they are not on display. Still in the Middle Bronze Age we have this reproduction bronze Dirk blade. This was based on a find from Newchurch in Radnorshire, where it was found at the foot of Castle Tump in 1875. I believe it is also in the National Museum of Wales collection. The 2 holes are for rivets to connect it to its handle, and for scale the blade is 260mm long. Daggers were around half this length, and they first appeared during the early Bronze Age. Dirks were a later development, and so were rapiers, which were half as long again, and swords which were around 600mm in length, and they, along with spearheads, were personal weapons that started to become more common during the Middle Bronze Age. There are also possibly signs of individual status. And here is a copy of the Newchurch Dirk that has been hafted. And you can see the bronze rivets in the handle that fix it to the blade. And for the pommel I've used bone. Now there are a couple of examples of bone pommels in the National Museum of Wales collection. These tang knife blades are reproductions of a blade that was found as part of a hoard near Brecon, which also included a couple of loop pelt staves and spear ferrules. What's unusual about this style of blade is that they're associated with the Urnfield culture from Central Europe. So was this an exotic import or a local copy? It has been suggested that this was a hunting knife, which makes sense as the curve on the end of the blade is suitable for skinning animals. Now the original is in Brecon Museum, though as far as I'm aware is not on display. And the marks you can see on the blade edge were left by the hammerstone during the hardening process. This is one of those blades that's been hafted. The technique I used on this to set the tang into the handle was to heat up the tang and burn it into the wood of the handle. This takes a good few attempts, so heat and repeat until it's fairly close to where it wants to be, and then you have to tap home the last bit. And the ferrule, being antler, which is made of a similar stuff to fingernails, is slightly elastic, so it prevents the handle from splitting. The heating of the tang does soften the bronze, so it does require hardening again. And this is the spine of that same blade to show some of the punch decoration. Not an exact copy of the original, but hopefully it's quite close. Moving on now to the Late Bronze Age, which in Wales was from around 900 to 600 BC. This socketed axe head is a copy of one found as part of a hoard by workmen building a road during the construction of Caboncock Dam in the Ellen Valley in 1895. And the description from the Archaeologia Cambrensis from that year read, "The hoard lay in a cavity covered by a large stone beneath a mass of rubble that had fallen from the precipitous valley side and was being broken up for road metal. A hone, which may have been one half of bivalve mould, was thrown away." The techniques for casting socketed tools differ in that you need a 3-part mould. The 2 parts of the bivalve mould plus a core, which was usually made from fired clay. This is a short video of me casting a socketed axe. The furnace I'm using is made from a mix of clay, soil and fresh grass, and as long as you keep them dry they will last for a few casting sessions. But left out in the weather they will eventually break down to their component parts and become archaeologically invisible in a very short time. You can hopefully make out the clay cores and in the tops of the boxes. Okay. So here I am opening one of the sandboxes that I poured in the last clip. This is a South Wales type axe. There's also a copy of an axe from the Caboncock Hoard. The loop didn't come out very well on this one.
Ooh.
These were early days and my success rate wasn't very high, but I have refined the technique since, which has improved the chance of a good cast.
That's really nice.
But with these, it's all about getting a good fit with the core. In this image we have a cast of another axe from the Caboncock Hoard. It's known as a South Wales type, as a number of them have been found in the region. They are quite distinctive with their square-shaped sockets and 3 ribs on opposite faces. The only known moulds of this type came from south of the Bristol Channel, and they are made of local stone types. They consist of a stone bivalve mould with a clay core. The roughed out cores seen here have a pouring cup with the holes positioned to let the molten bronze fill the gap between the core and the mould. Well, I hope that has given you all an insight into the art of Bronze Age metalwork. Thank you all for watching.